Well, the Children's Parliament started probably about 4 years ago. It was an idea that Cathy McCulloch and Colin Morrison from Edinburgh had. They had an agency who had actually worked with us in the past some years ago on issues of self-esteem and bullying, with the children in schools. So they had already done some work in Uist, and they approached the Western Isles Council with a view to running a pilot, a 3-year pilot. And they approached the Western Isles Council along with 2 other authorities in the Central Belt to ask that some schools participate in this. And there were some problems at the time with the Education Authority because they wanted to make it Western Isles wide to include Lewis and Harris. But I think with 40 schools, it just wasn't going to work. And because they'd worked previously with children, or the agency had certainly worked with children in Uist, they thought that Uist and Barra would be ideal for the pilot. So they approached the schools, and also at that time there was actually a lot more interest from schools in Uist than there had been from schools further north. In retrospect, I think that it actually worked better in the Western Isles, or it worked differently, but possibly better in that because it wasn't run through the education department and through the schools. And the children met at weekends and during holidays, and certainly non-school time. It meant that the children themselves were more committed, and they didn't see it as an extension of the school day or school activities. And also the adults who were involved weren't all teachers, and those who were teachers were there in their own time, and they were also more committed. And I think in many ways it worked better like that. Each school, each primary school certainly in Uist and Barra, was asked to nominate, I think it was 4 pupils who they thought would either benefit from the experience or contribute to the project. And they did, schools proposed, I think it was 3 or 4 children or young people in primary 6 and 7. And then the Children's Parliament themselves chose the final 2. So 2 children were elected from each school or chosen. And I mean, it was important to get the balance right. There had to be a gender balance, the same number of boys and girls, or if not the same number, then, about, a reasonable number. Also, children who were maybe particularly gifted or talented in certain areas, were included, and children who may have had needs in other areas were also included. So everybody came kind of with their own talents and with their own skills and with their own interests and contributed. Initially, the role of the ambassadors was not to facilitate, the meetings in any way. It was to join in and be part of it. But originally their role was seen as being a supportive role, supporting the children. I suppose that's why they were called ambassadors. And each ambassador had a designated number of children, between 2 and 4 children, with whom they made contact regularly. They met with them or they telephoned them, usually between meetings, and, just to give them, to support them in any way that they could, to find out, their views, which maybe they would in the early stages were happier to air, maybe to one person rather than, bring it up at a full Children's Parliament meeting. Quite often they had tasks between meetings, activities that they had to undertake themselves in the community or with their family or like personal research of some kind. So the ambassador would also help with that, to make sure that they were on task, and if they needed anything, to help out with that. Well, there was a programme set, because there had to be some kind of plan, as to how things would go and what would be covered all the time, and really it was based on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So there was a programme in place, but saying that, I mean, quite often the children themselves, instigated, the direction in which, activities would go. and certainly their ideas were taken on board and they were listened to, and things did go. So they had a certain amount of control themselves. Well, I think the children who are involved are certainly a lot more confident, or most of them are more confident in themselves. They were used to speaking out in roles and taking on roles and meeting people and expressing their views to people and showing people round, explaining to people what they'd done. So they're certainly a lot of them are more articulate as a result of being involved with the Children's Parliament. I think that also they made friendships which they wouldn't otherwise have made. They had to interact with children that they probably wouldn't have come into contact with under any other circumstances, either through choice or because of the geography of the islands. They met and made friends, and I think that was very important. Socially it was very important for the children. I think as a teacher I found it quite difficult at first, or maybe not so much difficult as strange, because as teachers we're used to being in control or controlling, and those of us who were ambassadors and teachers had to step back and allowed the children to voice their opinions and to behave in a way which might not have been appropriate in school. But gradually, after a few meetings, we all found our own niche, and we settled into a way of getting on, which was very open, and very supportive. I found.